Yeah, I'm a pharmacist from rural Carrollton, so this is the western part of the district. And my wife and I, we run the Medicine Shop Pharmacy in Jerseyville. She's a pharmacist too, and we just bought that in July of 2012. We'd worked for chain pharmacies, or in fact, my wife actually had worked for this medicine shop for a while, but I'd worked for Kmart before that and Walmart before that. Um, and we bought the pharmacy really to move closer to family. I've been a business owner in other ways before, but I always said I didn't want to own a pharmacy because it can be really stressful. It's stressful enough just being a pharmacist, but the idea that you might own it, now you're responsible for everything, it was a different level. But now that we've kind of settled into it, we really enjoy it. I have a son who's 8, his name's Alex, and daughter Mallory who's 6.
So tell us what makes you stand out against the incumbent Rodney Davis.
Yeah, it seems like all Republicans, when they run, they talk about how conservative they are, but their records don't always show that. I feel that I am really a conservative. I consider myself a constitutional conservative, and I will fight for those principles. Uh, a lot of our Republicans that are in Congress now, save for maybe 30 or 40 of them, they don't really fight for conservative principles and they don't advance conservatism. And I realize we don't have the presidency. Uh, Obviously, it's going to be easy if you got the presidency, if everybody agrees, but I feel like every bit of legislation that's passed seems to cede ground rather than just being a compromise where each side gets a little one way or another and there's not much movement. It seems like we lose, 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 lose. Somehow the Democrats, even from the minority, are able to advance, and Republicans don't, and that's why I'm really disappointed.
So is there an example of that?
Yeah, this omnibus spending bill. There's a long string of examples, but this omnibus spending bill, Republicans didn't really get anything. We got we made it to where we could export oil, and that was it. But there's a long string of things that we need to get under control as conservatives. Obama's executive amnesty, the EPA's control over our they could refer to navigable waters as drainage ditches now on our farms, and that they didn't do anything about that. It didn't do anything about Planned Parenthood funding. We've got a long history of not funding organizations that perform abortions, and that all that funding was reinstated under Obama, and we didn't even try to get that. And of course, the excuse that they make is they're worried about a government shutdown. But the problem is that the Republicans have already admitted guilt for shutdowns. First of all, they're only half responsible for a shutdown. The president's just as responsible as they are. But when you admit that you aren't willing to go through a shutdown before you even start a negotiation, you're going to lose. And I keep comparing it to like a game of cards. If you tell me that you're going to fold every time I bluff, I'm going to keep bluffing and I'm going to take your ante till you're out of money. And it just seems like they don't fight. They don't fight for the principles that they say they stand for when they run for an election.
Some would say that Planned Parenthood has saved a lot of women's lives. If you take abortion off of the table and you look at bipartisan solutions, what would you bring to the table in a case like that?
Well, you got to ask yourself, if you're about women's health care, then how come the government doesn't fund these crisis pregnancy centers? Or those are all over the nation too. Why have we chosen Planned Parenthood, who performs 300,000 abortions a year, to take our tax dollars? The truth is, none of those organizations should be getting any tax funding. They don't. They purport to be a women's health organization, but they don't perform Pap smears. They don't do mammograms. They're just focused on what they like to call forms of birth control. As far as I'm concerned, abortion is not a form of birth control. Um, Half the people involved in abortion die. I'm for the sanctity of human life, and there's no reason you should be able to use my tax dollars to help fund an organization so they can. They say those funds are segmented off, but any business owner knows that if you have money coming in segmented for one thing, you can divert funds from something else, to perform those abortions now. So that's not an excuse either.
So are you 100% pro-life, or are there instances that you believe warrant an abortion?
Life of the mother. That's the only instance where I think an abortion is okay.
So like incest or rape?
Those cases are really rare, but abortion is more black and white for me. We're talking about a developing human life who has not committed those sins. As terrible as those things are, rape and incest, women that go through that, it doesn't make them feel any better to the in the life of that human being that's developing inside them. I'm sure you might be able to find some that say that maybe it helped me forget, but the truth is that it doesn't help them forget the terrible things that's happened to them. And I'm for the sanctity of human life in all circumstances. So life of the mother is the only thing that makes any kind of logical sense to me.
So let's switch gears a little bit and look at balancing budgets. Do you support an income tax increase on all tax brackets?
No. I support either a flat tax or a fair tax. I kind of like the fair tax better personally, but as far as I'm concerned, it's about getting the power out of the IRS. And a simplified tax structure is what does that. We don't have so much a taxing problem as far as balancing budgets. We've got a spending problem. We're $20 trillion in debt. And that doesn't even include the unfunded liabilities. If we use the government's own numbers for unfunded liabilities, that is those things that the government has promised to pay for in the future, expenses that they know are going to come due, but they know the money's not going to be there. That number's closer to $200 trillion. For every tax-paying household, using $200 trillion, for every tax-paying household in the United States, that's over $1 million that the government has already borrowed in our names or promised to spend in our names. We all hope to be millionaires someday, and it's just an unreal number. We've got a spending problem, not a taxing problem.
So would you support federal spending as a means of promoting economic growth? And if not, explain the outcome and implications of your options.
Well, I don't think there's ever a circumstance where the federal government spurs economic growth by spending money. They have to take that money from the private sector in order to spend it. So the government has defined responsibilities in the U.S. Constitution, and it's supposed to spend money on those things. But everything else, it only robs that money from the economy, and it inefficiently spends it.
So what are the kind of programs that the federal government provides that you feel we'd be better off without?
Oh gosh, that would take. They pass.
Your top five.
Yeah, well, they pass 200,000 pages of legislation every year or whatever it is, and 95% of it they don't have the authority to do. Things that the government is involved in that they shouldn't be. Oh gosh, they control the amount of water that's in the tank of my toilet before I flush it. They control the type of light bulb that I'm allowed to have in my house. It's almost one of those questions where how do you name 5 things? Well,
so that's the EPA you're talking about.
Yeah,
Regulates those things.
the EPA,
So you do away with
and
the
it's
EPA,
not
put
so.
back on its
Oh yeah,
regulatory
if
power?
I could do away with the EPA, if I could do away with Department of Education, if I could do away with Department of Energy,
Okay.
none of those organizations actually advance any of those things that they purport to advance. And just because the federal government isn't allowed to do those things doesn't mean the state and local government shouldn't be allowed to do those things. We have state regulatory, environmental protection agencies. And that's really what it's about. What level of government is appropriate to handle certain jobs? Because when we have some guy in an office, really tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in offices all over Washington, D.C., who are writing regulations that we're responsible to uphold, we're responsible to follow, and for those unseen people to have so much authority over us here, it's just it's unbelievable to me. Uh, when those types of regulations occur at the state and local level, you know, you see that person every day who's regulating you and regulating your business, and you know, regulating your neighbors' businesses, and you can have an effect on them when they live close to you, and they can make more knowledgeable decisions about the way certain industries should be regulated when they're your neighbors, or when they're within driving distance to you. You know, even at the state level, you know, I'm an hour away. It seems like a long way, but it just takes me an hour to see, you know, all my congressmen here in Springfield. And if something really affects me dearly and I feel like they're doing something wrong, I can fix it in a day, or at least make my voice known in a day. That can't happen when it's in Washington, D.C.
So do you support requiring states to implement education reform in order to be eligible for competitive federal grants?
No, I don't like this scheme where the federal government pretends that it's not involved in education because it creates these regulations, and the states get the funding if they comply with certain standards. You know, I think the states can do a perfectly fine job of educating our students, and really the localities do a fantastic job too. Because if the localities given the power, as I was kind of describing before, as the localities have the power, they've got to respond more to the parents.
Well, if we look at renewable energy, tell us where you stand on the Keystone Pipeline.
I don't have a problem with the Keystone Pipeline at all. I mean, I would like to see it. I would like to see it put in, but
So where would you say the funding for the development of that or other renewable energy sources would come from?
I think private industry should be responsible for those things.
How would that work?
I don't know. You'd have to talk to the experts in it. I sure as heck am not an expert. Rodney Davis sure as heck is not an expert in the way to build a pipeline. You know, I'd rather talk to a pipe fitter on how to build a pipeline. You know, I'm not trying to be combative about this, but I'm trying to get you to understand the entire basis and substance of where I come from. I want the experts in the free market to deal with these issues. I don't want the federal government to, you know, pass a legislation which they know really nothing about, to have control over these types of things.
I guess
I
my
understand.
question is more about the privatization funding. How you would fund that through private sector.
Well, I guess I don't entirely understand the question. Are you saying the government's going to own this pipeline?
I'm just asking how you would fund renewable resources of energy.
I guess if, you know, electricity has a value, and if somebody can produce electricity with a windmill, and, you know, they can sell that, then private industry should be building a windmill, or private industry could be building a dam that provides electric power. I'm on an electric co-op, you know. I have local control over my electricity, and unfortunately they have to buy electricity from other sources, and the government kind of tells them that it can't be coal-fired anymore. They're putting coal-fired power out of business, and their coal miners are losing jobs in our district. And it's not because something's gotten less expensive. It's not because solar power and wind power has gotten cheaper. It's because the government has said coal-fired power is not a preferred source of electricity anymore.
So one thing,
Yeah.
I know Congressman Davis serves on one of the transportation committees,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of closer to home are the rivers, and what's your sense of what the government's role should be relative to locks and dams? And those aren't
Well, they can
too far
have
from your home in Jerseyville, right?
right. I live really close to the Illinois River. In fact, I'm kind of at the edge of the bluff over the
Oh, yeah.
Illinois River, not, you know, half a mile from the edge of the bluff, you know. But that power's within the Constitution. Navigable waters can be controlled by the federal government, and so we shouldn't. Being one of those powers, they certainly should have some control over locks and dams as it improves trade. You know, there's a lot of trade movement up and down our waterways, And if it's a navigable water, the federal government has absolute authority to regulate those types of things.
So where would they generate the revenue? Because that's always been a kind of continuing issue about how do we get the funds to make those kind of repairs and expand the locks and dams, right?
Well, same way they get all the other kind of funding, you know. I don't know where the funding comes from. They don't tax particular barges that go through the system. They don't do anything like that. It just comes from general funding, is my understanding, right, from our tax dollars. I really haven't thought about an alternative way to get that funding. That would require a lot of changes in a lot of other places in our federal government to ever decide I want to get funding through different routes for that type of system.
So I want to get back. You had mentioned either a flat tax or a fair tax. Can you explain your understanding? I don't. That's kind of a new word to me.
Yeah.
What would that be?
The flat tax is a tax where everybody pays the same percentage. And some people have plans where at the lower levels, you know, you have to make a certain dollar amount before they tax, at 15% or whatever it is. The fair tax is like a national sales tax. And I don't support either of those on top of what we already have. It would take repealing, is it the 16th Amendment, unless I'm getting it wrong, where they, allow us to tax income under the Constitution. It would take repealing that and then imposing this new sort of tax. Because the IRS, they've made it so complicated for people to participate in this system. It seems like the only people that pay low taxes are the really wealthy that have so much money that they can work the loopholes. We're just normal people like people in this room. They aren't really able to take advantage of those loopholes. We pay at a higher rate because the capital gains rate's so low. But also what's unfair is I've lived my whole life paying at the income tax rate, and I hope to retire someday. And I need to take advantage of that capital gains rate someday in order to retire, or else it's going to push my retirement off, I don't know, another 5 or 10 years. And so I hope when I get there, it's still there. But now I hear all this talk about getting rid of the capital gains rate. Well, that's how I'm going to retire. I don't have a pension. I didn't work a job. Almost nobody's got a pension anymore, by the way, but I don't have a pension. And that's the tax system I need to operate under to retire when I had planned to retire. So we get into all these conundrums because of so much authority has been given to so few people in Washington, D.C., and it can change at the whim of one Congress to the next. But there's no set of laws that we can count on because it can be changed so easily.
So, Evan, as you walk around your district and get feedback from people, what are the top 3 things that people want you to bring to Washington, D.C. to represent them?
The first thing they always want to know is am I pro-life?
Really?
Yeah. Obviously, people are always concerned about the economy, but that's never the first question. And I think that has something to do with, because it's always a concern. Economy is always a concern. But the first thing they want to know is, am I pro-life? And then the second thing they want to know usually.
Excuse me, but I want to clarify that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do they want to know that because they're for it or they're pro-choice?
Well, they're for it. Yeah. But most people I meet are Republicans, so as you can imagine, most of them are, going to be pro-life on the average. The second thing they're concerned about is illegal immigration, and that's probably really a tie with Second Amendment and gun rights. It really, if things are being talked about in the news about further gun regulations, that immediately jumps to the top of everybody's concern. So that Second Amendment rights has more to do with what's in the media, but it's always up there near the top. So pro-life, legal immigration, and then the Second Amendment are the top 3.
Could we go to illegal immigration? Congressman Davis has said he would not support any Syrian refugees coming in. Could you tell us where you would stand with that?
Yeah, I don't support bringing in any refugees that could be filled with terrorists without a way to vet whether or not they're terrorists. And because of the circumstances of how they come here, it's impossible to find out whether they're terrorists or not. I mean, you can't just ask them a question, you know, are you a terrorist? Do you love America? You know, but that's the type of things that we're doing because their own governments have no good records on these people. I'm not opposed to refugees under normal circumstances, but the truth is these refugees, on the average, they don't even want to be here. They want to go back home. They want to live in the cultures that they grew up in. They just want a safe place to live. If they're true refugees, they just want a safe place to live.
So for illegal immigrants, would you say you would return them to their home of origin? What about children that were brought here beyond their control illegally?
That's really something that's a conversation that has to occur later. I believe that the border has to be absolutely secure first. Because no matter what we do to deal with the people that are already here, if the border isn't secured first, we continue to have the same problems. You know,
So how will you know it's secure? Whose word are you going to take?
well, you know, obviously, if they keep, you've got to take somebody's word for
By
it.
all estimates, illegal immigration's way down.
Well, then how do these people keep coming into our country? You know?
I don't know, have you seen one lately?
Oh yeah, I see them all the time.
And how do you know they're illegal?
Well, some of them I know personally. You know, I used to work in Beardstown as a pharmacist, and you know, there's a lot of illegal and legal immigrants there, and I worked construction for a little bit too for my brother, and so there's a lot of them in that industry, and I loved them as my customers and as the people around me. You know, their culture is really similar to ours. I really like them, but you cannot convey citizenship upon yourself just by crossing a nation's border. Because we are not enforcing our current immigration laws, they're getting mixed messages in Mexico. I don't blame them for wanting to come here. If I lived in Mexico and I had no other alternative, and if I needed to feed my family, you can bet, because the laws are not being enforced in the United States, that I would be here and I'd be trying to get my family here. I don't blame them for wanting to be here. We're the greatest nation on the face of the earth, you know, the most accepting, the most generous people that there are. But we can't have citizens from throughout the world, you know, just conveying citizenship upon themselves and getting to partake in our economy. They drive down the cost of labor, and it's really hard for young people, especially in our inner cities, to get their foot in the door in these industries where they used to start to build their careers from and learn a trade and make a good living and work their way into the middle class. And it's such a mess simply because we haven't enforced our laws, and they're getting mixed signals in Mexico. There's nothing that tells them that they're going to get sent home. If what they believe is if they get here, there's a good chance they'll be granted citizenship if they just get their foot in the door here. And it's so sad because some of them have, you know, started businesses and built families and so on and so forth. But the shame is we don't even know really who they are. We think about 40% of them have overstayed their visas, work visas and travel visas and so on and so forth. So they've signed on the dotted line that they were going to leave at a certain time when their work was over, when their vacation was over, and they've committed perjury. And should we allow those to stay? I don't think so. I think probably they need to go home and apply under the normal ways. But I don't doubt that if that border is absolutely secure, that we may not find a certain percentage of illegal immigrants, you know, the ones that really tug at our heartstrings, that maybe some of them would be allowed to stay, whether they're given citizenship. I don't think probably any of them should be given citizenship, but maybe some of them could stay on a permanent work visa or whatever it is. And, you know, of course their kids will be here and their kids will be citizens, but it's just a big conundrum we've gotten ourselves into because we don't enforce our laws.
I'm still not sure that I understand how you'd know the border was closed other than by your personal observation.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to take somebody's word for it.
Right.
And when they quit catching them trying to come across the border, you're going to know it's pretty secure because word will get back to them that, hey, you can't cross our border anymore, and they'll quit trying. I mean, if you can't cross the border, obviously you're going to quit trying to cross it. So I think that's a simple way. When people quit trying to cross the border, we're pretty confident that it's secure at that point. But there's agencies that quantify that, whether or not the border's secure or not. That's not for me personally to decide.
So let's talk a little bit about Affordable Care Act. There's a lot of there's different viewpoints on either side. Some people hate it and would really like for that to be repealed, where that others say it has merit. For example, children on their parents' insurance till they're 26, being able to have a more competitive environment, and pre-existing conditions. Would you repeal Obamacare? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I would totally repeal Obamacare. Being in the pharmacy industry, people, they want to talk about their health care too. You know, I've got maybe 3 or 4 customers out of the thousands of them that say they're happy with Obamacare. The things that we could do to actually improve healthcare would be, as you work for an employer, would be for you to purchase that health plan even after you've left that job and buy it as long as you want to pay the premiums. You could keep that plan.
You mean extending COBRA indefinitely?
Yeah, something on that order. That'd be some way to do that. And I think we should allow insurance companies to operate across state lines so people can buy the kinds of plans that they want to buy. I have type 1 diabetes, so I'm the type of person that Obamacare was supposed to take care of. I never bought into it, but when I looked at those plans for me and my family, they were terrible. I look at insurance as something just like we look at our car insurance or home insurance. If our car gets wrecked or if our house catches on fire, those catastrophic type circumstances is what insurance is for. And so when I looked at these plans, I wanted to know, is a place like Barnes Hospital covered? Is a place like MD Anderson in Houston, Texas covered for those things like, cancer and kidney transplants? And everywhere that I wanted to go wasn't covered on these plans. And these plans really kind of stink. They only covered like 60%. And I was able to find alternative methods that really fit my life better. There's medical sharing plans out there that operate under kind of a loophole. They're allowed to exist, but I'm allowed to buy a high deductible plan, and that's what really has allowed me to get my healthcare expenses way down. I spend way less on healthcare since I became a business owner and didn't buy my insurance from my employer, and was able to get on this high deductible plan. I find that most people, they spend more than me. Like some of my employees still have traditional healthcare plans that they've purchased privately, and their healthcare expenses are higher than mine. And me being a type 1 diabetic, I'm supposed to be the most expensive thing there is to insure, and they spend way more just in premiums than I spend total in a year.
So if you found that loophole that's under existing law, how many other people could find that? I'm Bernie, by the way.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, thanks. I don't know why other people aren't seeking that. My plan, you're supposed to be a Christian technically to get on these plans, but there's other plans out there where you don't have to be of a particular anything to be a member. The way to explain those is like, if normal healthcare, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, is like a bank, well, these things operate like a credit union. So effectively, they offer the same services, but you tend to find that they don't get to use the same terms. They don't use terms like deductible and copays and things like that. They have other terms that I think, probably required by law to use.
I'm sorry again that I was late. Have we talked about Social Security at all?
No.
Because I know when I interviewed you in the past, you had said people like you, because of the ailments you've got, you don't think you'll live as long as some others, and you should be able to just opt out of Social Security and not pay the Social Security tax as you work?
Yeah. Oh, that'd be way better for me. I've known since I was 11 years old that I'm not very likely to live old enough to tap into Social Security or Medicare for that matter. And yet my entire working life I've had to pay into these programs I'm never going to see a dime of. And if I could keep that money myself, invest it myself, do whatever I want to do with it, whether I want to pay for my kids' college, it's my money, it's my business. I don't know why I have to participate in a program that is not even likely to exist for anybody, let alone exist in my circumstances. there's more people that believe in UFOs under the age of 40 than believe they're going to get Social Security when they come of age.
Where'd you get that figure?
I don't know. Same place everybody else gets all their figures, you know.
So,
The
but
way-
basically you're saying.
Well, I mean, it's got to come from somewhere. I can't.
If people can opt out of Social Security, that's part of like, it's existing law, it's social contract based on everybody paying. So if half the people decide I'm not gonna pay, then it absolutely will collapse and there won't be any.
Well, it's going to collapse anyway, the way it's going. We can do some things to save it, and if they would have been done 20 years ago, they'd have been a lot more likely to work. You know, whether we extend that age to, you know, whether we raise the age of eligibility, whatever they are, the further we
Or
push
charge
this.
admission to the UFO.
Yeah, there you go.
So
Try
Ethan,
that.
some people have talked about raising the cap on Social Security. Right now, it's a rather low cap. How old is it?
118,000 or something?
Yeah, I mean, now, you know, that used to be like a gigantic salary and now it's ho-hum. So would you, if it were to save Social Security as a social safety net for American citizens, would you be sanguine about that opportunity?
Well, I think that could play into a larger picture of raising eligibility ages, but to just that be the only way to save it, it's really just become a tax. That's honestly that's what it is now. It's just a tax, just like any other tax.
Yeah.
And so you're buying further into that. You know that if you just raise that dollar amount where you continue to pay into Social Security and those programs, we've already gone off the deep end on it. You know. So it could be part of a larger plan, but I don't think that alone is going to save Social Security, just raising that cap. Because the number of people, the money's not at the top. The money's in the middle. There's so many people in the middle in our country, middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class. The money that funds things is in the middle. If we confiscate every dollar that people have ever accumulated that are in the top 1%, it only runs our government for like 9 months. That's not just taking everything they make in a year, it's taking everything they've accumulated in their whole life.
Where'd you get that statistic?
I don't know where this statistic comes from.
Okay.
I mean you can say it about everything, you know.
Well, but that's an important, what you're making is an important.
I'd be happy to
policy.
look these things up and, you know, get you a list of where my statistics come from. I just wonder if you ask the same thing to somebody who has an opposing view to me.
We ask every candidate for their sources so that we can validate and fact check.
Okay, well, I wish I'd known that was part of it, and I would have absolutely brought a list of all these things, you know.
What about Medicare? Same kind of thing. Should that go away too, or what?
Well, it's same as Social Security. We're going to have to find different ways to extend it because people have paid into it. They've been promised this. It's been a fallacy the whole time it's existed that you know that there's segmented funds that are being held for them to spend when they need it. You know, but you know it's the same thing as Social Security. We're going to have to look at eligibility ages and you know types of coverages and allow people that want out of these systems that are in the red, you know, to get out if they want to.
So what are your thoughts on targeting, with national security, targeting suspected terrorists?
Like these, you talking about this metadata and stuff where they collect our phone records and see who's calling. I don't think the government has the authority to just collect data on us without a search warrant. They've never really shown that anything collected with that metadata has prevented any kind of attack. Our Constitution protects us from illegal searches and seizures, and I think our phone records are part of that information.
So where do you stand on the Apple versus the federal government on the phone of the dead
I can't really,
perpetrators?
I don't feel like I've got good information because every time I hear a story about it, they say, well, what the government is asking of Apple is something different than the next guy tells me. I think if the federal government has a search warrant for the records on a particular phone, and Apple has a way to access that, then I think Apple should be able to get that information for them or should be obligated to give them the information. I don't think Apple should be required to create a program that allows the federal agency or state or whoever a program that would allow them access anytime they wanted it. There's a reason that we need judges to write or sign search warrants, and I think that should be followed.
This wasn't a case of a search warrant, but a judge did ask for this. Does that in any way alter your point of view?
Well, if a judge asks for records from from that specific phone, and it's something that Apple could do, if it is, then yeah, I think Apple should get that information. Yeah.
Can we talk about defense for a while?
Yeah.
Defense is a pretty big spending category in the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that, and where do you think the direction of defense spending should go?
Well, there's waste in any agency, so of course there's probably some places where we can cut some waste in defense, but that is one of the areas that's in the Constitution that the federal government has the authority and more than that, the obligation to protect us. And yeah, we should have the strongest we should have the strongest military in the face of the planet. No question. No question.
What do you think our role in Syria should be?
I don't like this democracy building that we're getting involved in, but when mass genocide is occurring, we need to do something about it. Absolutely need to do something about it. For me to pretend like I'm some sort of military expert, like all politicians do, and they all pretend like, well, we need 12,700 troops to set on the ground, and we need this number of airplanes. That's a fallacy. Nobody knows exactly what we need to accomplish a specific task. But ISIS needs to we need to get ISIS under control. I don't like troops on the ground. I think there's a lot that we can do from the air. We might find after we've tried some air power on these people, and by bombing their communication centers and their oil, that's where they get their money from. It's my understanding that's where they get their money from oil. We need to be bombing those things too. We might find it's going to take some troops on the ground after those targets are softened from the air to accomplish the tasks that we need to accomplish. But we may not either. That may disperse ISIS enough that we don't have to put troops on the ground. We should be really hesitant to ever put troops on the ground, though.
Do you support mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenders?
Well, the problem is a lot of people plea to those lower things. They may have been a violent drug offender, but they plea bargain down to lower offenses. I think certain things related to marijuana, perhaps, maybe parts of it should be decriminalized. I don't have a specific plan for what we should do regarding marijuana. I'm not a proponent of marijuana. You probably won't believe me, but I've never even tried marijuana. I've seen my friends who've gotten involved in just marijuana, though, from an early age. It seems like the ones that I knew, they never reached their full potential. The ones that really got heavy into smoking marijuana, the ones that did roughly what I expected them to do in life. The ones that got tied up with marijuana, they didn't excel in life, and it's sad. I don't think our culture. A lot of people with marijuana, they compare it to alcohol. Our culture won't accept the banning of alcohol. I think our culture would still accept banning of marijuana, and I think that's probably the way it should stay. THC is the active ingredient in marijuana, and it's been available in pharmacies since I've been in a pharmacy. It's not even regulated like morphine. You can get refills on it. You can get a 6-month prescription for the active ingredient in marijuana, and it's been in a pharmacy, like I said, ever since I've been there. So I don't buy into this that it may solve health problems. It's a real drug, and it may solve health problems, but I don't buy into this that you've got to smoke it in a joint to get any health benefit from it. I filled it a few times from my pharmacy, and nobody ever gets it refilled. That's the best sign of whether something's really doing something, whether a drug really has a good effect. They never get it refilled.
So one of the other items that you discussed with us, that a lot of the folks in your district have talked about is gun rights. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Second Amendment, your thoughts on gun control legislation?
Yeah, I think I'm a proponent of the Second Amendment. I've been reloading ammunition since I was in probably junior high or high school. I understand firearms, I understand the laws, and I understand that the further you regulate them, it doesn't affect law-abiding people, or it does affect law-abiding. It doesn't affect criminals. Criminals already don't obey our gun laws, and if we ban all guns, there's just going to be stabbings, almost coinciding with was it what's the kid's school? Was that Sandy Hook? Is that what the so almost coinciding with Sandy Hook, there was a mass stabbing at a school in China, and we hardly ever even heard about that. Those those things still occur, and I don't know about you guys, but if I had to be in a knife fight or a gunfight, I think I'd choose the gunfight, you know. And I support.
Is there another option?
Yeah, well,
Kickboxing.
well, not really when there's wackos out there who have it in their mind that they're going to kill people, and unfortunately they choose the most innocent and defenseless among us. And when criminals don't know who has a concealed carry or where the next gun is at that might be used against them, they hesitate.
So what about kind of following down the same path of anything dealing with, we'll say, criminal justice reform? Where do you stand with those issues, and how do you see that playing out in the country?
I guess I don't have. Is there something a little more specific? I don't really have an overarching.
If you look at, say, people of color and incarcerations and other items, looking at how that can be reformed so that there isn't as much of a problematic area.
I don't know. It's kind of it's kind of a confusing issue. I mean, did they commit the crimes or not, or are we supposed to make sure that we prosecute and imprison more whites because there's a higher percentage of blacks? You're getting in quite a mess there. If you commit the crime, you should be prosecuted to the extent of the law. And if we don't like the law, if we don't think certain things should be criminal anymore, then we need to repeal those things. But I understand that's part of the news, and we're trying to release people of certain race groups from prison. We act like there's racism involved in our justice system, but I guess if there's rampant racism in our justice system, then we need to look at our judges. Not us.
One of the arguments was the difference in crack cocaine versus
Heroin,
powder cocaine. The crack cocaine, which was used more in inner cities, you had 3 times the prison sentences for possession.
Oh, of crack cocaine over regular cocaine. Well, then the law is going to have to be changed because the judges and the justice system is just trying to apply the law. But I don't have a specific plan for that. That's not really, that's not so much the job of the federal government anyway. That's more state laws than anything else.
This is more of a state issue, but recently there was an article that described the increased number of gun permits that the state police are processing. So how do you account for that? I mean, that just befuddles me. I don't.
Well, I can tell you with my own concealed carry, I was a little worried to get, that started in, what's 2 years ago or whatever it was when concealed carry started. I kind of wanted to see for sure what information they needed to know about me, whether they needed updates on my, health, or because there was rumors about, you're going to have to go to a doctor and the doctor's going to have to release you for one thing or another and things like this. So I think there's a lot of those people that put it off initially because they just wanted to see how the whole system was going to work. And when they found out it wasn't that big a deal to do it, so you get some of those. And I think these terrorist attacks play into that too. And there's a lot of people around me. I don't live in a rural part of the district. Guns are part of our
Right.
daily lives. And there's a lot of people who want a concealed carry permit, and it's time consuming to go through the course. And when there's a terrorist attack or something, it just brings it to their mind again. Say, hey, it's time to do this. It's not they've been worked into a frenzy and they think they're going to be the victim of a terrorist attack. It's just those types of events really bring it back to your mind and say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and go through the course is really what the cause of that is.
About 45 minutes, if there's any other questions. So, like anybody for president?
I'm not supposed to answer this question, but I don't have a problem answering. I like Ted Cruz.
Why?
I like Ted Cruz because he actually does the things he said he was going to do.
And that's what did he say he would do that he did?
He's fighting the establishment. He's not going to cave to the Republican hierarchy in the Senate. If he says that he wants to repeal Obamacare, he's going to fight to repeal Obamacare, and that's why I like him. I kind of like Rubio. I don't agree with him on amnesty. I don't know why. If he believes that, if he believes in amnesty, I would have a little more respect for him if he just, made the case. Make the case for what you believe in. Don't hide what you believe because you think it's unpopular. I don't want to hide what I believe because I think it's unpopular. I know a lot of you probably disagree with me in this room on a lot of the things that I believe, but that's not fair. It's not fair for me not to reveal the way I really feel about these things. I'm invigorated by my beliefs, and I wake up every morning and I thank God I'm American, and I feel like I understand what it takes to survive in the free market and things like this, and I'm eager to go out and make this day mine. And I want everybody to have that same feeling. And I feel like sometimes people on the other end of the spectrum, they're relying too much on somebody else. The government needs to pass this regulation for me to succeed or whatever it is. I want to do the best I can for myself. And I want everybody to think like I think. It's a tall order. Everybody's dug in on whatever they believe. But I honestly, I want people to believe the same way I believe.